Well, this looks to be the kind of thing that people who claim to be sovereign citizens file in court with some regularity. It's pretty incomprehensible, and it's very, very confusing, very hard to track, and basically makes legal arguments that have no basis in the law at all, and no court has ever recognized, to my knowledge, because basically what it is when you boil it down and cut through all the the noise in the very convoluted language, what you come up with is a claim that you're a sovereign citizen, meaning you're no fealty to any government. You are not a citizen of the United States, and you're therefore not subject to the laws or requirements of the United States. And if you think about it for just a moment, you can see why that argument has never prevailed and never will prevail in a court, because it'd be a pretty nifty move. You don't want to be bound by the laws of the government. Just say they don't apply to you. I've seen some of those pleadings, and they are nonsensical, indecipherable. They use obscure and incoherent language that lawyers and judges do not recognize, and have a terrible time sorting out. And when some of that's filed, courts can fairly readily just sort of deny the whatever request they think is being made there and ignore it. But sometimes people engage in papering the courts so thoroughly with these kind of pleadings that some people call it paper terrorism. To try to overwhelm the system and bog it down. So that can happen. It was a movement that began maybe 50 or 60 years ago, with groups like the Posse Comitatus that tended to be very far-right, anti-government, anarchist-type groups that also began with strains of racism and anti-Semitism. And over the years, the arguments have sort of been adopted by a broader swath of the populace that includes not just white supremacists or the hard right, but any group or individual who basically wants to declare themselves to be free of the rule of law in this country. It's hard to say how dangerous any individual is, but there are reasons for red flags to go up. The sovereign citizen movement includes people who will sort of demonstrate the fact that they're independent of any authority of an existing government by not complying with fairly mundane requirements like getting a driver's license or a license plate, or things of that nature, or refusing to yield to the jurisdiction of a court when charged with something like that. So we see that in this case, and that's fairly innocuous in and of itself. The problem is that the independent sovereign movement covers a swath of people that includes those who just engage in minor disobedience like that, all the way up to groups that are armed and very violent and dangerous. And so groups like that tend to be on the radar screens of law enforcement, who know that there may be reason to be a little bit wary of them. Now, I don't know the particulars of this case, so I don't know what police knew about this family or what other signs there were that there were risks of violence, but that can be something that police would take into account and would lead them to approach people like this with a little bit more caution, knowing that at least at the fringes, these groups can be at times extremely violent. What is law enforcement to do? Well, I mean, clearly, if people are violating the law enforcement has a responsibility to enforce the law, and it can't simply allow certain segments of the population to declare themselves to be free of the burdens and responsibilities that all of us live under. So law enforcement is certainly within its rights and behaving responsibly when it tries to enforce the law with people like this, because their arguments are simply legally invalid. Now, that is not to say, by saying that, I don't mean to say that this shooting was lawfully justified. On that, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the body-worn footage. What I can tell you is that police can use force when making an arrest, but under the Fourth Amendment, they can only use such force as is reasonable under all of the circumstances, including circumstances like the severity of the crime, the nature of the risk posed by the individual, and a whole host of other factors like that. And they can even use deadly force, shoot to kill, under limited circumstances, but again, only under those circumstances where they have good reason to believe that the person that they're apprehending poses a serious risk of death or great bodily harm to them or to others. And so that's where that if they saw a holster, and more importantly, if they saw a gun, the investigators and the courts reviewing this are going to have to determine whether the police officers behaved reasonably when seeing that, in believing, as I assume they will claim, that their lives were in imminent risk of danger because of that gun. The courts will have to assess whether that belief was reasonable and whether then shooting and killing with as many bullets as they fired was a reasonable response to that threat. It's really hard to figure out, but there are nutty perspectives out there. A lot of people who simply don't trust the government embrace readily, and this one fits the needs of people who sort of have that kind of frame of mind. But it's really hard to know exactly what motivates it. But it is based a lot on fundamental distrust of government and belief that there are conspiracies going on that judges and lawyers are all in on but won't admit, to take away their independence and freedom.